King Herod, best known in the Bible for ordering the deaths of any infants who might be Jesus' age, turns out to have had a gardening hobby. Soil samples from excavations at his Jericho palace, taken almost a half-century ago, were recently analyzed, and the pollen particles revealed sophisticated horticulture. Miniature pine, cypress, cedar, and olive trees grew in clay pots that were originally recovered by archaeologist Ehud Netzer. Many of the tree species would not typically have grown in the desert around Jericho, making the garden a demonstration of Herod's greatness, a horticultural feat to impress guests and subjects. The Israel Antiquities Authority announced the rediscovery and preservation of Herod the Great's basilica in Ashkelon. Herod was known in his time for the dramatic locations of his palaces and fortresses, and this Roman-style construction, a public building for community activities, was no exception. The huge edifice, larger than a football field, was first excavated over a century ago, but is now being re-excavated and developed to attract visitors to the Tel Ashkelon National Park. The final reconstruction will include a small ancient theater called an Odeon, marble pillars and capitals, and huge marble statues of pagan deities. Discovered in a farmer's field in northeastern Egypt, this inscribed monument bears the name of one of the few pharaohs actually named in the Old Testament. Hophra led an Egyptian army into Judah to help King Zedekiah resist an invasion by Babylonian King Nebuchadnezzar. The ploy was only temporarily successful, and true to the prophecy in Jeremiah 44 verse 30, the pharaoh was killed by his enemies after a disastrous foray into Libya. The stele contains 15 lines of hieroglyphics, so far untranslated. Mostafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, described it as a border stele which the king erected during his military campaigns towards the east. This raises the intriguing possibility that it might describe Hophra's campaign to support Zedekiah. Archaeologists announced the discovery of a previously unknown city on the west bank of the Nile near Luxor. Believed to be one of the largest Egyptian cities ever unearthed, it dates to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. This pharaoh was the grandfather of Tutankhamun, but more importantly perhaps, the grandson of Amenhotep II, believed by many evangelical scholars to be the pharaoh of the Exodus. The city appears to have been suddenly abandoned. The inhabitants may have been driven out of their homes when Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten, rounded up workers to build him a completely new capital city in central Egypt. What remains today may reveal many details of daily life in Egypt around the time of Moses.
In 2017, UK consultancy Albion Archaeology found several small cemeteries with Roman graves in Cambridgeshire, England, dating to the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. In itself, that's not uncommon in the region, but one male skeleton, age 25 to 35, had a large iron nail embedded in the ankle bone, and, the firm states on its website, crucifixion, quote, seems the only plausible explanation. If so, the man, who shows signs of arthritis and thinning legs, perhaps from shackles, will be one of at most 4 examples of crucifixion ever discovered by archaeologists, because, the firm explains, quote, victims were often tied to the cross rather than nailed, and if nails were used, then it was routine to remove them afterwards. Albion Archaeology said it's remarkable that this man received a formal burial.
It's called the Cave of Horror. And it's easy to see why, given the only way for archaeologists to access it is by rappelling down the side of a sheer cliff. Although the history of the cave is as dark as its name implies, excavators describe what they found inside as between heaven and earth.
Wow.
Dozens of fragments, pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls, uncovered after nearly 2 millennia. The scroll fragments are small, some minuscule, but big enough to still draw wisdom from, says Dr. Orrin Abelman, who reads one of the uncovered passages.
These are the things you are to do. Speak the truth to one another. Render true and perfect justice in your gates. And do not contrive evil against one another.
The arid conditions of the Judean desert has ensured dozens of other objects have also withstood the test of time, including these ancient olive pits, remnants of clothing and sandals, as well as a wooden lice comb similar to one that might be used today. Archaeologist Chaim Cohen says the 4-year project is vital to protect the treasures within the caves from future plunder.
This project is the protection of the area because, again, it is almost impossible to beat the looters, to find the looters while they're working, and the solution was to get to the caves before the looters.
The massive excavation site spans parts of southern Israel and the occupied West Bank, but Israel has long been criticized for removing objects found in Palestinian areas. According to international law, taking cultural property from an occupied territory is forbidden. And yet those concerns haven't prevented the Israeli Antiquities Authority from putting the discoveries on display in Jerusalem. Some of the discoveries go well beyond the biblical, like this 6,000-year-old skeleton of a small child, and this almost perfectly preserved basket, which wouldn't look out of place at a home furnishing store today.
The cave is empty. We found everything. And then when we came, we understood that we are looking at a whole intact basket. We took it and sent it to the Weizmann Institution to carbon date it, and when the results came back, we were shocked. It is 10,500 years old.
A dazzling puzzle piece from the past, found alongside ancient wisdoms, which still resonate today. For CBS This Morning, Imtiaz Tayeb, London.
This is an excavation of the Israel Antiquities Authority done for the Israel Lands Authority as part of a huge project for the development of a new neighborhood for the city of Yavne. I'm sitting at the moment in the midst of a large wine press on the trading floor. This is just one of 5 large wine presses at this site, and this gives an idea of the large quantity of wine that was produced here. We're talking about 2 million liters annually from this one site. And this particular kind of wine is what we know as Gaza wine. And Gaza wine was a trademark wine that was from the whole of this area of the southern part of the coastal plain. We have to realize that this was a prestige wine. It was a light white wine, and it was taken to many, many countries around the Mediterranean. We're talking Egypt, we're talking Turkey, we're talking Greece, maybe to southern Italy as well. So this was a wine that was widely distributed around the Mediterranean. In the excavation here in Yavne, the main find are jars. And this jar is the most typical jar that we found at the site, a jar which is known as a Gaza jar or an Ashkelon jar, which are very, very similar. The shape, which you could even sort of compare with a cola bottle today, was something which was completely known to anybody who saw them. And these were typical jars which were used for wine that came from the area of the southern coastal plain in Israel. And of course we have many other finds. These jars over here are called Palestinian baggy jars, and they are the main kind of jars which were found all over the area of Israel right through the Byzantine period. We have these oil lamps which are dated to the same period as these jars. And we have also oil lamps which come from a later period, from the early Islamic period. These are dolls, children's toys, which were found also at the site. In ancient times, wine had a great importance, not only as an export product, but for many other purposes. For example, first of all, people enjoyed drinking wine. But beyond that, this was a major source of nutrition. And this was a safe drink because the water was often contaminated, so they could drink wine safely, and then they could also, of course, take it in as part of their daily diet. Excavation goes well beyond the usual scale of excavations that the Antiquities Authority conducts. A continuous excavation of 2 years, 200 to 300 workers daily, huge site, a huge area of excavation. That will be the challenge of the excavators here, is to work through all the material and to bring it to publication at the end.
גאה ושמח לבשר לכם מסלול עתידי שיפתח לקהל במנהרות הכותל, שהקרן למורשת הכותל המערבי יחד עם רשות העתיקות חושפים, ורואים כאן תקופות שונות, החל מהתקופה החשמונאית, ההרודיאנית, הרומית, שמשמשים בערבוביה. אין ספק שהמסלול הזה יציג בפני המבקר עושר מדעי וחווייתי שלא יסולא מפז.
אנחנו נמצאים עכשיו בעצם בתוך אולם מפואר ששימש כטרקלין לאירוח של אנשי מועצת העיר והאורחים המכובדים שלהם לפני העלייה להר הבית. בחפירות הארכיאולוגיות שנערכו במקום הזה בשנים האחרונות בעצם גילינו עוד שני חלקים מדהימים של הבניין הזה שכוללים עוד טרקלין אחד ממש זהה לטרקלין הזה. בין שני הטרקלינים פעלה מזרקה שבה מים בעצם יצאו מתוך צינורות עופרת שהיו משולבים בתוך כותרות קורינתיות בראשי עמודים. זהו הבניין הכי מפואר מהתקופה ההרודיאנית שאנחנו מכירים היום בירושלים. ושאלת השאלות מה עשו בו. המקורות ההיסטוריים ובעיקר כתבי יוסף בן מתתיהו מאירים בפנינו את האופי של האזור הזה. יש פה בניינים ציבוריים מפוארים, והתמזל מזלנו לבקר באחד המפוארים שבהם. בניין שנבנה ככל הנראה בשנות ה-20-30 של המאה הראשונה לספירה, ובעצם שימש את מכובדי העיר. בשלהי ימי הבית השני, בתוך הטרקלין המערבי מתקינים בריכה מדורגת מטויחת, שאנחנו חושבים ששימשה כמקווה טהרה, אחרי שהטרקלין יוצא משימוש.
חלק גדול מהעבודה שהשקענו הייתה בניתוח של מערך התנועה הנכון באתר, על מנת שאנשים גם יגיעו לפה, גם יסתובבו פה, ולמעשה גם לאפשר למבקרים לראות יותר מאשר מסלול אחד, ליצור מספר מסלולי תנועה בתוך מנהרות הכותל, על מנת שאנשים יגיעו לכאן יותר מאשר פעם אחת או פעמיים.
נפלה בידינו הזכות לחיות, לעבוד במקום הזה, כי כל תא שטח כזה, המבנה, הטריקלינום המדהים הזה מימי בית שני, מספר את הסיפור.
אבני ירושלים מספרים סיפור, ואם אתה יודע להקשיב לכל נדבך ולקרוא כל אבן ולהיכנס לכל תקופה, אתה יוצא כאן עם מסרים שככל שנעמיק בעבר, אין ספק שיפתחו לנו את העתיד.
Archaeologists say they found a piece of pottery with a rare inscription.
This is the 7th year for this excavation site. This year, archaeologists are talking about finds from the biblical book of Judges.
The most exciting discovery is an inscription which is from around 1100 BC, the time of the Judges. We know very little about this period from archaeological point of view, and we don't have any meaningful inscription from this period.
Then, they discovered part of a jar handle in a storage pit in the ground. The name Yerubbaal, Jerubbaal in English, was written on it in ink.
And this is the first time that we have an inscription from the time of the Judges with a meaning. And in this case, even the same name appearing both on the inscription and in the biblical tradition.
Excavation director Professor Josef Garfinkel says they've found about 100,000 pot shards at the site.
But why this is so important? Because it was inked, and we have here 5 letters. We have Yud and Resh and Bet and Ayin and Lamed. And when you read it, you get the name Yerubbaal.
Gideon's father Joash calls his son Jerubbaal in the book of Judges because he tore down the altar of Baal and then defeated the Midianites. Archaeologists say the owner likely wrote his name on the small jar. They don't have proof that the inscription refers to Gideon of the Bible, but Garfinkel says it's significant because it highlights the historical connection to the Bible.
So it's indications that there were historical memories embedded in the biblical text and passed from generation to generation.
There is little archaeological record of this period, so the discovery linking a biblical name to the era is notable. Archaeologists also say the discovery provides evidence for the spread of alphabetic writing, first developed by Canaanites living in Egypt around 1800 BC. Nearby Lachish, where a few other late Bronze Age Canaanite alphabetic inscriptions have been found, this may have been a center for the preservation of alphabetic writing. The discovery of an alphabetic inscription at Lachish, dated to the 15th century BC, was also announced in 2021. The level of literacy in the Old Testament is still a matter of debate among scholars. Interestingly, the story of Gideon references a young man who wrote down the names of the 77 elders of Sukkot.
Workers are still digging at the synagogue. They hope to uncover more of what some believe is one of the most significant archaeological finds in recent history. Given the age of the synagogue, its location, and the history of the Galilee, it's likely Jesus taught there.
It's a kind of a miracle. This is an archaeologist's miracles.
The discovery of a first-century synagogue on the Magdala Center site is a game changer for the legionaries' planned destination in Galilee. Archaeologists, working with volunteers from around the globe, have uncovered pottery and coins indicating the synagogue had not been used since the year 68 AD. Among the many surprise discoveries were brightly colored frescoes on the walls and intricate mosaics unheard of in other synagogues from this period. But the find that has made this discovery most significant for the Israeli Antiquities Department is this: the intricately carved Magdala stone. The Magdala stone has been called the most significant discovery related to the Second Temple. It is believed the artist who created this stone must have seen with his own eyes the temple, and in particular, the tripod-based, seven-armed menorah that is replicated here in stone. This is the oldest menorah sculpted on stone ever discovered. With the discovery of the synagogue and the significance of the sculpted menorah, it now became clear that the Magdala Center had been thrust upon the world stage and will attract tourists, pilgrims, and scholars from across Israel and around the world. While the discovery of the synagogue was a significant find for Jewish history, the particular location of the discovery, on the outskirts of ancient Magdala, had meaningful significance for Christians as well. Is this where Mary Magdalene met Christ? Mary Magdalene is one of several women who, according to Scripture, followed and provided for Jesus during his traveling ministry. By many accounts, we know that Jesus taught in the synagogues of Galilee. It is likely that people who used this synagogue were witnesses to the multiplication of the loaves and other miracles depicted in the four Gospels.